Psalm 3 is where we're going to be this evening. And we are just going to be taking a few minutes to look at this. I'm not planning on this taking a super long time. But we want to just take some time and look. And I was trying to look through and see, okay, what would be an encouragement for us? We live in uncertain times. We have adversity of different amounts or different kinds. What's something that could be an encouragement to us? And as I was looking and praying and asking God for direction, we kind of came across Psalm 3 and decided, this might be an encouraging psalm for us. And our title for this evening is Salvation Belongs to the Lord, which comes right out of the last verse, one of the last statements that David makes in the psalm. So I'm going to go ahead and read it for us, and then we'll get into it. So, Psalm 3, a psalm of David when he fled from Absalom, his son. O Lord, how my adversaries have increased. Many are rising up against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no deliverance for him in God. Selah. But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory and the one who lifts my head. I was crying to the Lord with my voice, and he answered me from his holy mountain, Selah. I lay down and slept. I awoke, for the Lord sustains me. I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people who have set themselves against me round about. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, for you have smitten all my enemies on the cheek. You have shattered the teeth of the wicked. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing be upon your people. Selah. So just as a little bit of context, I'm sure we're for the most part familiar with the story of Absalom and King David. King David had sinned with Bathsheba, had murdered her husband, and as a result, the prophet God through the prophet Nathan tells David, the sword is not going to depart from your house. And it's not too long after that that problems arise. And you can read about the events leading up to David fleeing from Absalom in 2 Samuel 13 through 18. And basically, Absalom, because of his discontent of how David had handled situations and circumstances, decides that he's going to take over the kingdom. And he does this over a period of months or maybe even years. And he wins the hearts of the people. He stages a coup, and David is forced to flee for his life. And some of the people who actually side with Absalom were people that were originally on David, working on behalf of David. And so David has to flee from Jerusalem. And what we see here is that this is a psalm of David when he fled from Absalom, his son. David is facing adversity. He is facing uncertainty. His own son wants him dead, wants him gone. And I can't even imagine that sort of circumstance or that sort of situation. But I'm sure that we could all picture different circumstances where we face adversity or uncertainty, or we're not sure about what might happen next. And so what we see is how David responds to this. And so we have basically 3 points. We have the derision of David, or those who are mocking David. We have David's dependence on the Lord, and then we have David's deliverance. That's our framework for looking at this psalm tonight. And so as the increase of adversaries, danger has arisen unbidden, and the adversaries that David had have multiplied, and David sees that there are many. David is calling out to God. We see he says, "O Lord, how my adversaries have increased." So he had to deal with Saul. He had the Philistines. He had attacks before, and David, and now his son, and people who were supposed to be his subjects, his loyal subjects, were now siding with Absalom, and his adversaries have increased. Many are rising up against me, and then many are saying of my soul, there is no deliverance for him in God. Now, if you read the story, as David is fleeing, there really does not, how is this going to get turned around? How is David going to end up back on the throne? How is he going to end up back in Jerusalem? This does not look good. And actually, it's only through someone, a loyal counselor who stayed behind, God using that David is not wiped out the first night, because instead of sending out troops the first night, Absalom waits. And that gives David the time to get away and get to safety. And so this is not looking good. They are saying there is no deliverance for him in God. But then what we see next is what David's dependence on the Lord in verses 3 through 6. But thou, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory and the one who lifts my head. Now, David, shield about me, David is understanding that any protection that he has comes from God. He is where he is because of God in the first place. God is the one who has protected him through his life. He has defended and protected him when it came to the lion and the bear, and Goliath, and then later Saul. And David is remembering and recalling to mind that God is his shield. Also, what do we see? He says, thou art my shield about me, my glory. Now, the word here for glory is kavod. It has the idea of weight or weighty and splendor. David is not relying or looking at his own laurels or his own feats or accomplishments. God is who he is glorying in. And then what we see next is the one who lifts up my head, or the one who lifts my head. And when we think about lifting up of a head, this could be your head is down and God is lifting it up. But it also, David is recognizing that his own ascension to the throne, his own anointing by Samuel, his own position as king, they were all there. He is there only as a result of God. God is the one who put him there in the first place. So David is recalling those things to mind. And then we see in verse 4, David's cry. I was crying to the Lord with my voice. Are there ever times when we are, whether audibly or mentally, crying to God to intervene or to why is this happening, right? Why now? Why this particular circumstance? And I don't know about you, but for me, there may be different circumstances happen and it just feels like your stomach drops out from under you and you are just, it just feels like you got a brick sitting in your stomach and you go, what is going on? Why is this happening? Why now? Why this? How come this? And David is crying to the Lord with his voice. And what does David say? And he answered me from his holy mountain. Does God hear us as his children? When we call to him for help, God hears us. Now, David is already recalled. He is my shield, my glory, the one who lifts up my head, the one who's put me where I am already. It's all God. God is the one who does this. But then I'm crying to the Lord with my voice, and he answers me from his holy mountain. And then what do we see? We actually see that David's confidence. I don't know about you, but when there is uncertainty, or I kind of broke the system after a while, but when I worked in EMS, and you have a really, really intense call in the middle of the night, trying to go back to try to lay down and go back to sleep afterwards. Didn't work very well. We have something intense. Our adrenaline gets pumping. We're concerned or fearful, or maybe it's a proper fear. Something happens, and we don't sleep, right? Or we don't sleep well. But what we actually see is David, in his response, he's crying out to God. He knows that God is his defense. And what does he do? I lay down and slept. Now, granted, David did flee. David didn't say, God is going to protect me and I'm going to stay here. David fled from Absalom. We have a New Testament example of this, of Paul, right? Whose name was Saul at the time. He became a Christian. He was preaching and proclaiming Jesus Christ as the Messiah in Damascus, and the authorities didn't like that. The Jewish authorities didn't like that. They started looking for him, and so what did they do? They let him down over the wall in a basket so he could escape. Paul broke the law intentionally to get away, right? To escape because of what he was doing. David fled even though he was trusting God. It was not wrong for him to flee. But then once he was where he needed to be, he knew that God was going to protect him. I lay down and slept. He trusted God. He knew that the situation at hand with Absalom, his son, has come into Jerusalem. David is sleeping in a tent somewhere, possibly, or just on the ground somewhere, and he's able to have rest. And then what do we see? I awoke, for the Lord sustains me. So not only was he able to sleep, but then he was able to wake up. Who's the one that allowed you to have another day this morning when you woke up? It was God. Who's the one that allowed me to have sleep and then wake up? God. Right? And so, what does he say? The Lord sustains me. I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people who have set themselves against me round about. Even if he's surrounded, David is not fearful. And David, this is not a one-time thing. Keep your finger here and turn over to Psalm 27. This is also from David. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the defense of my life. Whom shall I dread? When evildoers came upon me to devour my flesh, my adversaries and my enemies, they stumbled and fell. Though a host encamp against me, my heart will not fear. Though war arise against me, in spite of this, I shall be confident. One thing I have asked from the Lord, and that I shall seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to meditate in his temple. For in the day of trouble he will conceal me in his tabernacle. In the secret place of his tent he will hide me. He will lift me up on a rock, and now my head will be lifted up above my enemies around me. Oh, we're having some similar language here, aren't we? And I will offer in his tent sacrifices with shouts of joy. I will sing, yes, I will sing praises to the Lord. Hear, O Lord, when I cry with my voice, and be gracious to me and answer me. When thou didst say, seek my face, my heart said to thee, thy face, O Lord, I shall seek. Do not hide thy face from me. Do not turn thy servant away in anger. Thou hast been my help. Do not abandon me nor forsake me, O God of my salvation. So we'll end there with Psalm 27, but it keeps going, and it's him showing dependence and trust in God. So we have the derision that David experienced. We have David's dependence on God, and then we have David's deliverance. And that starts in verse 7. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God. For thou hast smitten all my enemies on the cheek. Thou hast shattered the teeth of the wicked. So the idea here of he is recalling previous enemies in his life that God has delivered him from. And the idea of smiting on the cheek or slapping on the cheek, it's like a derision or rebuttal or like smack. How dare you say that? And God has complete right to do that. It's not like God actually walks up to someone and smacks him on the cheek, but God can deride people, can't he? In the way that that he responds to them and the things that happen. And so, thou hast smitest all my enemies on the cheek. And then thou hast shattered the teeth of the wicked. Now, the idea of shattering of teeth, taking away their ability to cause harm, right? And in Psalm 58, that's an interesting psalm. I was reading it earlier, and it's talking about false gods and people and those who are wicked. And what we have in verse 6 of Psalm 58 is God shatter their teeth in their mouth, break out the fangs of the young lions. A lion can't hunt and eat very well without fangs, can it? And so David is recalling to mind that God, the previous enemies, God has placed in derision and taken care of. They are no longer potent or able to cause harm. And David knows that that will ultimately happen to all those who oppose God. And then verse 8, which is the title of our passage, of our message this evening, salvation belongs to the Lord. David understands that he can't get out of things through his own wiliness, his own craftiness, his own military capabilities, his own ability in leadership. Salvation comes, protection, deliverance comes from the Lord. And thy blessing be upon thy people. So David is asking God to extend care and support to those that God cares for, those who are under God's protection. So as we've looked at this psalm this evening, we're just taking a few minutes, we have a psalm where David is communicating a dependence and a reliance upon God, even in an uncertain, difficult, probably heartbreaking situation. We see that he's able to rest because of his dependence upon God. And we also see his confidence that God will ultimately deliver him. And then he praises God and asks for God's blessing. So how do we think about this? How do we learn from this? Well, we're not David. We're not the nation of Israel. We're not God's chosen people when it comes to the nation of Israel, but we are his church. God has saved us from death and hell and destruction. And sometimes we know that he can save us from hell, from wrath in that way, but then we wonder how he can take care of us when the car breaks down, or when we have someone upset, or when people start saying things that are not true about us. Now, I don't have any direct personal experience about that right now. As far as I know, I don't have someone going around saying all sorts of things about me. Could be wrong, but as far as I know, but we do know that we live in a society and culture that is saying things that are completely backwards of what they actually are when it comes to Christians, Christianity, God. Yeah, and so we have all of those sort of things. And we can respond in really only two different ways. One, we can become fearful, agitated, irritated. We can be not able to sleep, right? Or we can trust God, call for his deliverance, know that he will deliver us ultimately, and that God will ultimately have those enemies in derision. So we can trust God, we can depend upon him, and let us, with David, say, the salvation belongs to the Lord. That's all I have for you tonight. Let's go ahead and take our prayer bulletins at this time.